Good morning again. This is Brighter Morning with Bo, and my guest this morning is Dr. Marlene Attzs, and we will talk with her. Marlene Attzs is a development economist, and she has been making the case for structural adjustment of some kind in Trinidad and Tobago, and she has been talking about the need to not only restructure but to diversify and to transform the economy. And the debate is raging now because of COP26, which is focused on zero emissions on or before 2050. And at the same time, natural gas is deemed to be very important to Trinidad and Tobago and its future. And we continue to sign agreements on in this regard with companies domiciled here who have local and international interests in the gas business. So we talked to Dr. Attzs at this moment. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning. Before we get to the IMF report, I mean, you must have been following what's happening in COP26 and the Prime Minister's statement at COP26 and then his response here. I had the Minister of Energy here recently, and shortly after the delegation came back to Trinidad and Tobago, there was a signing with Shell for the Manatee side of the gas jointly owned by Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. And that offers up 2.7, I think, TCF of gas, which is a significant amount. So it's very valuable in terms of Trinidad and Tobago's potential. How do you see what is happening here in terms of the bigger challenge for Trinidad and Tobago in the world, and then the local challenge of restructuring, structural adjustment, transformation, diversification? You notice I asked you the easy question first.
Okay, let's take it from the top. The COP conversation, of course, brought to the fore again the need for us to be a little kinder to the earth in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the primary culprit in that regard comes from countries that are heavily dependent on non-renewable resources, such as oil and gas. So Trinidad and Tobago, while it is not a significant player globally, we are culpable in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions. And because of our heavy dependence on the energy sector, as well as the very small size of our population, we come out as a high per capita emitter of greenhouse gases. So that is the starting point for our conversation. So COP26 was meant to see a lot of countries commit to reducing their carbon footprint. And Trinidad and Tobago has been having this conversation for years. I mean, the last budget that was presented a couple of months ago, there was a conversation around electric cars, which would have been in part of the government's strategy towards reducing that carbon footprint. So we have committed at COP26, Trinidad and Tobago has committed to reducing our emissions by 15%, I believe, by 2030. That is going to require a lot of effort, both on the part of the government in terms of its national strategy, but it's also going to require effort on the part of the people. And to get the people on board requires the people to understand, requires the population to understand what is required. So to me, that is a significant challenge because I don't think there is sufficient understanding among the population about our carbon footprint and measures that can be put in place to reduce that carbon footprint and the whole conversation around renewable energy. So that's one element of the discussion that we can park for the time. The second part of that conversation is that the reality is that we do not have the resources independently to help us transition from the energy sector. So we have to capture the rents from the energy sector to help us transition and to reduce that carbon footprint. So we need to use the energy sector, which is causing us to emit gases, greenhouse gases. We have to use the energy sector and the rents that accrue, the money that we earn from that sector to help us transition into precisely, and to help us to meet those commitments that we've made internationally. So it's a very tricky situation. Hence, I imagine the commitments to signing with Shell and all of the other commitments that we have with the multinational companies with respect to energy sector. Yes, so that is where we are in terms of that conversation. But I certainly do think a part of that conversation also has to be the onboarding of the population, because I don't think sufficient members of the population are onboarded and understand the conversation around that transition from non-renewables to renewables and the implications for life and livelihoods in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, well, there's never been what can I say, a valuable conversation about it nationally. I mean, you have pronouncements from time to time. You have indications of commitments made internationally. There is no real explanation of what those commitments require, of whom in this society. And
well, I think that speaks clearly to the point I'm making, that we have these pronouncements, but really the infrastructure and the architecture to get us to move forward will depend heavily on we the people. And we need to understand the conversation, and we need to understand our role in that conversation, so that we can be allies moving forward. Until and unless we have those kinds of comprehensive conversations with the population and at all levels of the population. So for example, why should I, Jane Public or John Public, go and spend $100 on an LED bulb when I can get a cheaper bulb for $15 or $20? Those are the kinds of things that the average person, those are the decisions that persons make. And until that there is an understanding that the LED helps us or assists us in reducing our carbon footprint, however small the contribution might be, then it makes little sense. I mean, we enjoy some of the lowest electricity rates to date. Some conversation around that changing based on a review of the rates by the RIC. But again, is there a deep understanding of, that nuanced understanding of turning off your lights when they're not in use, having different kinds of air conditioning systems, because we know it's hot outside, so a lot of people are dependent on air conditioning systems. Having air conditioning systems that use different kinds of gases that are less impactful on the environment. So all of these are conversations that I think we need to have the population engaged on, so that moving forward we can move forward as a country to help reduce this carbon footprint.
All right, let's shift a little bit to the recent Article 4 consultation that took place. This is the first consultation that we've had here with the IMF since 2018. We didn't have any in 2019 or in 2020. And this one took place by Zoom, I suspect. It was virtual. And I imagine what the IMF did, because I'm not deeply familiar with the process that they use. I imagine what they did was simply try and replicate that in the way that they do when they come here, which is to say to not just talk to the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Planning or some of the other ministries, but to talk to all the stakeholders involved in the process to get an assessment of what people are thinking. And this Article 4 report came out, and the Minister of Finance has been celebrating the report as a positive report for Trinidad and Tobago because they indicate that in 2022 we are going to have a fair amount of growth, 5.7 I think they said. And he's been talking about that as a positive report. But when I read the report, I mean, the real value of the report is in the subtext. And the subtext is a set of warnings about all the problems we have and the fact that we've got to attend to them. And what we are dealing with here is a simultaneous equation that whose solution cannot be postponed. But that has completely been ignored by the Minister of Finance in his interpretation. And the rest of the government hasn't spoken much about it. So I imagine this has just been, this report has just been laid there as a document with good news for the government, when in fact it is not good news at all. It is a warning about the challenge and the crisis that we face, even as the price of energy products is pretty high in the global marketplace. So give me a commentary about it. I know you know this kind of stuff very well. I know this is your forte. You've been looking at it for a long time. You've been thinking about it. You've been talking about it. Let us have your considered view on this.
Okay, let me see if I can keep this under an hour. Let me start by taking a quote from the Article 4 consultation. The IMF says strong recovery subject to high uncertainty. And I think if I were to take away anything from the Article 4 consultation report, it would be that 5.7, 5.9. I think that is overly optimistic, and overly optimistic on several counts, because I think that 5.7, 5.9 is predicated on a vaccinated population that can return to some levels of normalcy. And I tuned in to the program before I went live, and you were making the point about vaccination hesitancy that we're still facing in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think that 5.9 is what economists call all other things being equal. Yeah. So assuming higher levels of vaccination, assuming a continued uptick in energy prices, assuming production is up, because energy prices can be up, but if production is down, it does not redound to Trinidad and Tobago's benefit. Assuming that we got COVID under control. So, and I'm talking now not simply in terms of vaccinations, but we now have Omicron. And if you recall last year in 2020, time kind of is merging and moving by so quickly. Yes, 2020, when we started to grapple with COVID-19 in its original manifestation, we found that energy prices quickly plummeted and we were facing negative prices. We do not know, as you correctly said when you were having your conversation, when you were sharing your thoughts on Omicron, we do not know what is likely to happen with Omicron, what global impact it is likely to have. We see some countries already reacting and closing their borders and banning flights from certain countries, etc., etc. We also do not know if Omicron already is in Trinidad and Tobago and what the likely impact is going to be. What we do know is that within recent weeks, we have seen a significant increase in the number of cases that we have and also in the number of deaths. And that is a worrying sign. And I'm laying onto the IMF conversation the COVID-19, because that is our reality.
Sure.
We cannot divorce those things. So we cannot have a conversation around economic growth unless we infuse or weave into that conversation COVID-19, because that is the unknown that we have and that we have to grapple with. So all of that to say that 5.9, I think, or 5.7 is extremely optimistic. The second point I want to make is about some of the details in terms of the Article 4 report. The IMF noted with some concern that our debt has now moved closer to 90% of our GDP. They've noted with concern the foreign exchange challenges that we continue to have in Trinidad and Tobago. They have proposed a more flexible exchange rate. As an academic, we know that there is validity to that argument and validity to that suggestion. But from a development and a political perspective, we know that now is not the time to have a depreciation of our exchange rate. We're already facing supply chain challenges that is causing increasing prices. So the cost of labor is going to increase. We're going to see food price inflation increasing, will continue to increase. So now is not the time to lay on top of that a more flexible exchange rate, but the conversation must come. The IMF pointed to data paucity. It says that we need to have more robust sources of data to help inform decision making. These are not new issues. We have been making the point. When I say we, several economists have been making the point, and certainly I have making that point for many, many years. So it's a lot of things happening inside of the whole question of fiscal prudence, the question of subsidies that the IMF has been speaking about for many, many, many years now. So where do we go from that? As you have mentioned, I have been talking about structural adjustment for several years, and I think the IMF and also the Moody's have expressed concern about our continued heavy dependence on the energy sector. So put into the mix, if you will, Trinidad and Tobago's commitment to reduce its carbon footprint by 2030, which is around the corner. Our heavy dependence on the energy sector, and that dependence is also reflective of a high vulnerability, because whatever happens in the global market immediately impacts on us. And then the growing debt, which is understandable, because, as I said, we had COVID-19 to deal with, and we had to find the wherewithal. There's also caution about the extent to which we draw down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So all of these issues, these equations, you correctly call them, I smile because that's how I refer to them. It's a set of simultaneous equations that requires very carefully calibrated economic policy moving forward to help us achieve not 5.7 or 5.9, but help us to achieve positive rates of economic growth. So enter the conversation around diversification and structural adjustment. I think all of these issues, the vulnerability to energy, the commitments in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, really, again, bring to the fore the issue of the need for us to structure, reform our economy, and to pay careful attention to that. And to structurally transform, I agree, will not be easy. It will require us to depend on the energy sector, because that is where we're going to get the bulk of our resources, our financial resources from. But we have to make a concerted effort to move into other sectors that satisfy a reduction of our carbon footprint, but also can contribute to employment and sustainable employment and livelihoods and economic growth, and help us earn foreign exchange. And those are conversations that you can't just flick a switch and find the solutions. So we have to start laying the groundwork laying the foundation, educating our citizens. There was a conversation before COVID, what I like to call BC, before COVID, about the workforce of the future. The ILO had been doing a lot of work in terms of anticipating what the future workforce would look like. I think those are the kinds of conversations that we need to have in a country like Trinidad and Tobago, where you're going to see your job market. Hopefully, once you engage in appropriate structural adjustment, and structural adjustment, I mean changing the structure of your economic system and all of the attendant supporting infrastructure that is required to support a new diversified economic system. What is your education system going to look like? What are you going to be training people on? So you have electric cars. Do we have people who are technically competent? So it's no longer your long-time mechanic, your grease monkey, so to speak. Do we have people who are trained to deal with electric cars? Do we have persons who understand the nuances, who understand how climate change could possibly impact on fisheries, for example, how it could impact on agriculture? So it's all of these conversations. So when we talk about structural adjustment, it's not simply looking at issues like your foreign exchange, or your fiscal policy or your fiscal management, but it is also looking at your education sector. What is your workforce going to look like? And those, as I said, are conversations that need to start, and some thought needs to be put into those conversations so that we can prepare our population for the new strategic direction that we need to take.
But let me kind of pick out a couple of things and ask you.
I've lost audio. I'm not hearing.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionst.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo, and I'm Bo Tiwari, and we are talking to Dr. Marlene Attzs, economist at the University of the West Indies. Let me just clear up one thing. Dr. Attzs kept referring to 5.7, 5.9, and that is because the IMF projected 5.7, and I think Moody's used the number 5.9, if I'm not mistaken. So both of them are projecting economic growth quite significant for 2022, partially based on the high energy prices. But I started by saying I'm going to ask you some simple questions, but they really represent, when you put them together, the very, very hard and complex decisions that Trinidad and Tobago have to make all at the same time. They really must address this together. And it is this. First of all, what does it mean that you don't interfere with the exchange rate, but you have a raging black market and foreign exchange scarcity? What does it mean when you're telling the country you have a 2% inflation when the whole world, because of the logistical nightmare that we are facing, is facing screaming high prices in almost every single product that you import? What does it mean that we have to move away from the dependence on energy, and therefore what you need are non-energy investments. What does it mean that we've got to produce more of what we consume and we are not doing anything about it, nor do we have a climate of incentives to make that happen? What does it mean that our labor participation is 54% and we really need to get people to work and to have incomes? And what does it mean that we have high prices now and we've been depleting our HSF? Are we going to put any money from the energy rents that we are getting at these high prices now back into the HSF? So I put these things to you and I give you full play until the news time to speak to those issues.
All right. All of the issues that you've raised are, of course, interrelated. And I want to start with one of the things that I've been reflecting on, and you just raised it, the issue of we need to produce. I'm hoping that you're hearing me because I'm...
Yeah.
Okay, all right, yes, okay.
Yeah.
All right, lovely. The issue of productivity is one of the things that has concerned me, particularly since the lockdown measures. And I'm linking the issue of productivity to the ease of doing business, because I've heard several business persons complain that it is now worse than ever trying to conduct business because people are on rotation because of the health protocols, et cetera, et cetera. But we've not transitioned some of our public sector activities that support the business community, or that support life in Trinidad and Tobago. We've not transitioned some of those to online systems. So you have to depend on when somebody comes in to work physically to get something done. So, of course, there's a further disruption. So I have a concern for what productivity is going to look and feel like for us in Trinidad and Tobago, given what we've experienced with COVID-19 and the different kinds of work arrangements. As I've said before, the private sector, I think, for the most part, was able to navigate almost seamlessly to work from home and online systems so that there was very little disruption to their business operations, as it were. I am not sure if the same can be said for the public sector, and I think therein lies a challenge, because much of what we do in Trinidad and Tobago depends on an enabling environment that is in the public sector to allow systems to take place. So that is one point I want to make. Two, the second point. Mm-hmm.
We are getting to news time now, so I'm going to have to break. I just want to ask you, are you able to spend 10 minutes after the news, or do you have commitments that you must go to immediately?
5? No, yes, sir. I'll stay on.
I won't ask you any more questions. I'll just let you finish.
Just to finish this conversation.
What you're doing. I didn't want to leave it in midair. So we'll break for the news now with Andrew Chan. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. I'm Bo Tiwari, and this is MCTV, Multicultural TV in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region.
For the best prices and friendly service, check out Westby Supermarket today. Affordable prices just right for your pockets. Shop in clean, spacious and well-stocked shelves for all your needs. At Westby's, we stock a wide variety of fresh fruits and vegetables, and also pre-packaged veggies for on-the-go meals, and not forgetting a wide range of meats for any occasion. Westby Supermarket, located in Diego Martin and Aruca, for all your shopping needs. Call them today at 632-8150 or 632-0009.
News on MCTV.
This is the 7 a.m. news on MCTV and U975 Hot Like Pepper Radio. I am Andrew Chan. Good morning once again. During the COVID-19 press conference on Saturday, Health Minister Terence D'Alsing was asked if issues in the parallel healthcare system have contributed to the number of COVID-19 deaths. The minister responded by saying it was a shared responsibility.
The parallel healthcare system cannot take responsibility for 2,000 deaths. The deaths over the past year is a shared responsibility between all of us. Let me explain. we have been urging people from day one that the impact of your health status, especially if you're a non-communicable disease patient, is going to impact on your care. Trinidad and Tobago over the years and decades is one of the most severely affected countries when it comes to rates of diabetes, hypertension, and so on.
The minister did admit the human resource was stretched at this time, but he also revealed the technology is being used to monitor ICU patients remotely.
We have increased the percentage, the numbers of ICU beds. But we have also said clearly months ago that the human resource is going to be stretched. And I have indicated that one of the things we did to make up for that human deficit is to employ technology so that ICU patients could be monitored remotely in a cold zone, their vitals monitored, and when their vitals go off, the alarm bells ring in the cold zone and resources are rushed to them.
Meanwhile, former Member of Parliament Dr. Tim Gopi Singh has responded to the health minister. A graph was put out showing this country had the highest number of deaths per million population in the world. The minister debunked this as political games. Speaking on a UNC platform over the weekend, Dr. Gopi Singh claimed the data suggested the figures were taken from reputable sources.
These are figures coming from Johns Hopkins and Oxford University. So we are number 2 in ranking in the world as the highest amount of new cases per million population on a 7-day rolling average. And according to, this is information from November 24, 2021. And the new deaths per million population, we are number 1 in the world. So the Minister Dial said, we are really number 1, unfortunately. With Trinidad and Tobago, 12 deaths per million population on a 7-day rolling average. USA, 3.42. United Kingdom, 1.95 deaths. Singapore, 1.5.
Gopi Singh went on to say Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley had suggested the population was desensitized to the number of COVID-19 related fatalities. The Prime Minister's alleged comments came during his address to the nation last week.
He wrongly observed that the population has become desensitized to the rising number of cases and deaths. The population is never desensitized to these amount of deaths. How can one be when thousands of families and friends are affected over the period of time?
Some international news now. The South African president has condemned the travel bans enacted against his country and its neighbors over the new coronavirus variant, Omicron. Cyril Ramaphosa said he was deeply disappointed by the action, which he described as unjustified, and called for the bans to be urgently lifted. The United Kingdom, European Union and United States are among those who have imposed travel bans. Omicron has been classed as a variant of concern. Early evidence suggests it has a higher reinfection risk. The heavily mutated variant was detected in South Africa earlier this month and then reported to the World Health Organization last week, Wednesday. Ramaphosa said there was no scientific basis for the travel bans and that Southern Africa was the victim of unfair discrimination. He also argued that the bans would not be effective in preventing the spread of the variant. Ramaphosa described the emergence of the Omicron variant as a wake-up call for the world regarding vaccine inequality, warning that until everyone was vaccinated, more variants were inevitable. And that brings us to the end of the 7 a.m. brief news update right here on MCTV and U975, Hot Like Pepper Radio. The studio now turns back over to Dr. Bo for the continuation of Brighter Morning.
News on MCTV.
Welcome to the Value Optical Rock the Frame Festival Red Carpet where we... Oh, wait. Renee, is that you?
Yes, darling. It is I.
Okay. What are you wearing today?
These are Vogue frames from VO, darling. Yes, boy, I get 15% off of these frames and then I get an next 10% off the add-ons. Boy!
Book online or hurry down to rock your look at the Value Optical Rock the Frame Festival now. Value Optical, expert care for your eyes.
Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo on MCTV, Multicultural TV, and I'm Bo Tiwari, and we are talking to Dr. Marlene Attzs. When we broke for the news, Dr. Attzs was talking about some of the implications of the IMF Article 4 report for action and the challenge, the difficulty that it poses to get these things done, which we have to do simultaneously, really. It is not something that you can sequence over time. They all have to be done. So she was talking about that. We'll give her a chance to proceed.
Thanks again, Dr. Tiwari. So just to get back, so I made the point about productivity in the context of what happens in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, we keep divorcing issues, or there are some attempts to divorce issues, but productivity has to tie in with our ease of doing business, has to tie in with investment, has to tie into recovery, has to tie into getting the economy back on some kind of growth path. So I think all of these are germane to the conversation around the very optimistic projections for economic growth in Trinidad and Tobago in 2022. The other point that you touched on was the foreign exchange rate. And as I said earlier on in the program, it is a difficult time for any government to envisage moving to a more flexible exchange rate, as has been suggested several times in the past, several commentators, but more recently in the IMF Article 4 consultation. Now, what I suspect is going to happen in the absence of a more flexible exchange rate is that the Minister of Finance is going to use the $644 million gift that the IMF provided, the supplementary, the allocation, from our SDR, our special drawing rights, that was provided to bolster reserves coming out of the crisis that COVID-19 posed, the fiscal crisis that it exacerbated. I suspect the minister is going to draw down on those reserves to try to maintain the exchange rate, to ease the pressure, so to speak, and to make some financing available to the business sector, to the private sector, because as you know, and I think as many of our citizens know, we consume a lot of things that are imported. Even things that are manufactured locally, the inputs are in fact imported, so there is always a very heavy demand for foreign exchange. So I quite suspect that some of those reserves will be used to put onto the market, to be injected to ensure that we maintain the exchange rate until such time, and hopefully it will simply be a question of when, not if, we move to a more flexible exchange rate so that we can essentially eliminate the disequilibrium that we're seeing in the foreign exchange market. And you're quite correct. There is, in fact, a black market for foreign exchange. So if you're willing to pay the price, you can, in fact, get, I understand, you can, in fact, get foreign exchange, but at significantly higher prices. One of the points that was raised either in the Moody's or the Article 4 consultation, I forget now, was some caution about our depleting of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which is meant to be our rainy day fund. Now, we did have to draw down on it last year because last year and into 2021, we have seen not just some dark clouds, some very heavy thunder showers in terms of our economic landscape. And the HSF is intended to provide for those occasions where we need to stabilize the economy. So we did draw down, the government did draw down on the HSF for those purposes, but there is concern that the sustainability aspect of it, the heritage aspect of it, is being compromised, so that there may be nothing left for future generations. So we have to manage the HSF, and there is, of course, the concern that in the past we have been borrowing to essentially put funds into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So again, as we said at the start of the conversation, it is a very complex set of equations to be solved. So we're borrowing, increasing our debt to invest, to put into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. We then draw down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, and we borrow again, and so it goes on. You are absolutely correct on the point of inflation. And earlier in the conversation, I spoke about rising food inflation, and I do suspect that the central bank in its economic bulletins, they have been flagging the global supply chain challenges that are causing increases in our food inflation, and that is likely to continue, I suspect, well into the first quarter of next year. And again, because of what we're seeing with Omicron now, and because of all of the uncertainty around Omicron, we're not too sure how that development is further going to exacerbate some of these challenges that we're already witnessing in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the world. So it is going to be I think it's going to be a challenging couple of months ahead, both in terms of what we do know and also the uncertainty around Omicron and anything else that might come our way. So all of these to say, even before Omicron, I felt that the growth projections were very optimistic, and I suspect now, with Omicron actually rearing its head, and we're not too sure what the gestation period is going to be, or what the impact is likely to be, that certainly now, those growth projections are going to be severely compromised.
All right. I promised you just to let you finish this, so I want to thank you very much, Dr. Attzs, for staying with us the extra time and for agreeing to be here this morning. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and to get your considered views on the economy as a national and as someone who wants to see the country go right for a change. So I want to thank you very much. And
thank you very much for inviting me. It is always a pleasure to be with you on a morning.
All right, we will talk again another time. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. We take a break now for commercials, and we will be right back.